Have you ever found yourself caught in a pattern of profound confusion, watching as people who seem to cheat, manipulate, or live in perpetual shadow appear, for a time, to prosper? There is a deep, quiet pain that comes with living a life anchored in integrity, only to feel isolated or mocked by the momentary gains of the morally unmoored. Perhaps you have been the one who felt the sting of betrayal, the one who tried to warn a loved one, or the one who simply could not understand why the universe seemed to reward the shallow and punish the sincere. This cognitive dissonance, this agonizing gap between what we know to be right and what we see unfolding in the world, is one of the heaviest burdens the conscious soul can carry. It breeds frustration, cynicism, and a creeping doubt in the very existence of a foundational order. But what if that feeling of dissonance is merely a trick of time, a failure to look beyond the immediate horizon? What if the universe, governed not by chance but by an asterisk-ethical regression that is always in effect, is simply awaiting the moment of its most powerful display? The truth is, the fundamental law of spiritual and psychological gravity is never suspended. You are not wrong, you are simply witnessing the prelude. This feeling of being the seer, the one who sees the pattern before it manifests, is a profound form of spiritual isolation. When you understand the deeper mechanics of life, you witness the slow-motion car crash of a soul that has chosen a path of self-deception, while others celebrate its short-term journey. The immediate reward for the morally compromised often comes in the form of material gain, superficial admiration, or the temporary avoidance of responsibility. This is the great deception, and it is here, at the peak of this frustration, that we must turn to the unshakable foundation of truth. We must anchor our weary perception not in the fleeting scenes of the present, but in the eternal, undeniable mechanisms of consequence. This deep-seated law, which governs all of existence, ensures that no energy is ever lost, no intent is ever unrecorded, and no action, good or bad, is ever truly without its ultimate return. Your clarity is not a curse. It is a preview of the justice that is already in motion. To dispel the confusion and anchor our perspective, we turn to one of the most powerful and fundamental declarations in all of Scripture, a verse that serves as the ultimate assurance of cosmic order, Galatians 6:7. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. This is not a suggestion. It is a categorical statement of the nature of reality. The immediate context of this verse is often understood within the financial support of a church community, encouraging generosity toward those who teach the word. However, the foundational principle of reaping what you sow is one of pure moral causality, a universal law that precedes and extends far beyond any specific religious practice. It declares that the universe is a closed-loop system of energetic and ethical return. When Paul writes, God cannot be mocked, he is not referring to a personal, vindictive deity. He is referring to the law itself. The structure of existence, the teleology of all things, is designed such that you cannot inject poison into the stream of your life and expect to drink clear water. Deception, manipulation, or spiritual laziness might trick a few people for a few seasons, but they cannot, and will not, trick the very architecture of reality. This principle establishes a non-negotiable reality. The quality of your harvest is determined entirely by the quality of your seed. Every thought, every concealed intention, every word left unspoken, every act of subtle malice, and every moment of genuine generosity is a seed planted in the soil of your future. The time lag between sowing and reaping is the crucial element that causes so many to be deceived. An individual may sow weeds today, and the harvest does not appear until tomorrow, leading them to believe the law has failed. Yet, the law functions with the silent, irresistible precision of a ticking clock. The universe is merely waiting for the seeds of ethical regression to fully mature. This foundational understanding should bring a profound sense of calm to the seer. When you are tempted to be discouraged by the apparent success of the morally compromised, remember, the harvest is guaranteed. The timing is not yours to control, but the certainty is absolute. This truth is the cornerstone of a unified soul, knowing that your integrity is not a vulnerability, but your ultimate future security. The logical mechanism behind Galatians 6:7 is the constant, subtle process of ethical regression. To sow dishonesty is not merely to perform a single act of deceit. It is to establish a neural and spiritual pathway that makes the next act of dishonesty easier, more automatic, and more compelling. This is the ultimate self-mockery. The individual becomes internally aligned with the very darkness they project. On the philosophical level, this speaks to the teleology of existence. The universe is always striving toward order, truth, and coherence. Any action that runs counter to this, any attempt to introduce chaos, falsehood, or manipulation, creates an imbalance that reality must inevitably correct. The consequence, the reaping, is not a punishment externally imposed by an angry God, but a necessary internal collapse triggered by the soul's self-inflicted incoherence. You become internally divided, requiring constant energy to maintain the facade, which leads to spiritual exhaustion and the eventual shattering of internal integrity. The internal world, which is the only world that ultimately matters, begins to resemble the chaotic, poisoned seed that was sown. This internal disintegration is the first and most certain harvest. Consider the individual who sows the seed of incessant, subtle manipulation. They might achieve temporary goals, but the price is the erosion of their ability to trust, to be present, and to feel genuine connection. They can no longer distinguish between genuine affection and tactical advantage because their internal operating system has been rewired for strategy. This is the silent justice. They have sowed the seed of deceit, and they reap the harvest of profound, self-imposed isolation. Their outward gains are built on a foundation of sand, which inevitably shifts, but their internal state has already succumbed to the very thing they projected. This is the wisdom of conscious distance. We set boundaries not because we are afraid of the world, but because we understand the internal mechanics of consequence. We recognize that the chaos others sow will eventually return to them, and our role is simply to ensure we are not standing in the blast zone when that moment of reckoning arrives. We do not need to fight their battle, because the universe is already enforcing the law. The law of reaping is also a profound psychological truth because it speaks to the concept of moral causality, the idea that every choice is a cause, and the emotional spiritual state that follows is the effect. When a person sows kindness, they are not just being nice to others. They are building a reservoir of positive memory, genuine connection, and internal peace within themselves. This positive infrastructure makes them more resilient, more creative, and more attractive to aligned, honest people. Conversely, the individual who consistently sows seeds of bitterness, envy, or deceit is not just harming others. They are creating an inner environment saturated with toxic, corrosive emotions. They reap what they sow in the form of heightened anxiety, constant paranoia, the inability to rest, and the psychological burden of perpetually watching their own back. The universe does not require a complex legal system to enact justice. The law is executed in the form of a person's deteriorating internal landscape and the inevitable breakdown of trust in every relationship they touch. This profound, self-generating justice is the ultimate, inescapable proof that Galatians 6:7 is a statement of universal mechanics, not an arbitrary moral decree. Now, let us move from the philosophical anchor to the assertive exposition, detailing the real-world, visible manifestations of the truth laid out in Galatians 6:7. These are the four patterns that prove God's law of consequence is always in action. Pattern 1. The collapse of synthetic trust, the liar's isolation. The first pattern of consequence is the collapse of synthetic trust, which is the inevitable fate of the one who sows deceit. The liar or manipulator initially sows a seed of controlled narrative, achieving short-term success by crafting a persona or a false scenario. However, this initial gain demands a continuous, geometrically increasing effort to maintain. Every new lie must be supported by two older lies, and every new relationship built on a foundation of falsehood is an anchor waiting to be severed. The harvest, therefore, is not a sudden, dramatic exposure, but a slow, psychological entropy. The individual who sows deceit reaps a life defined by profound, self-imposed isolation. They can no longer rely on their own memory of truth, leading to a crippling cognitive dissonance. Psychologically, they are perpetually in the mode of defense and surveillance, unable to relax into the moment. They become the victim of their own creation. The people they attract are often mirroring their own superficiality, leading to hollow relationships that fail the moment genuine adversity appears. This is the moment of reckoning, when their carefully constructed reality demands a foundation of genuine trust, and they discover that the only thing they can reliably produce is suspicion. They have sowed the seeds of distrust in the hearts of others, and they reap the consequence of living in a world where they can trust no one, believing everyone is acting as dishonestly as they are. This is the invisible pattern the seer recognizes. The liar's success is temporary, but their internal prison is permanent. The universe simply mirrors their internal landscape back to them. Pattern 2. The harvest of diminishing returns, the cheater's exhaustion. The second visible pattern of consequence is the harvest of diminishing returns, experienced by the one who sows the seed of constant shortcuts and manipulation. This individual operates under the delusion that they can perpetually bypass the process of hard work, mastery, and ethical effort. They cheat on the test, they plagiarize the work, they take credit for the efforts of others. They gain an early, unearned advantage, which validates their approach and encourages a deeper commitment to ethical regression. But the law of sowing and reaping is absolute in its demand for genuine substance. When you sow a shortcut, you reap a skill deficit. The inevitable consequence is that at a certain threshold, the promotion, the major project, the true leadership role, the borrowed or fabricated skills will fail to materialize. The person has reaped the empty shell of a success without having sown the substance of true competence. They are perpetually playing catch-up, living in constant fear of exposure. The harvest is not just the eventual failure, but a corrosive, internal exhaustion. They are forced to work 10 times harder just to cover the gap created by their initial shortcut, ironically using more energy than the honest path would have required. They sowed ease, and they reap a life of panic and spiritual debt. The seer understands that the person who skips the planting and watering stage is guaranteed to have nothing but empty hands when the harvest season truly arrives. Pattern 3. The spiritual backlash of misdirected power, the taker's emptiness. The third consequence is the severe spiritual backlash reserved for those who intentionally sow seeds of darkness, envy, or emotional violence. This is the active mocking of the divine order, the soul that deliberately attempts to disrupt the light in others by spreading malice, exploiting the vulnerable, or attempting to diminish a genuine virtue, is engaging in a fundamental spiritual violation. Their intent is to draw energy, attention, or power toward themselves by tearing down the positive energy of the environment. They appear, for a season, to have an unnerving influence or a dark magnetism. However, the universe operates on a principle of balance. Every time you disrupt the positive flow of energy, you incur a debt. The backlash is not a strike of lightning. It is the fundamental rejection of your energy by the universe itself. The harvest is a deep, profound, and persistent emptiness. They have sowed the destruction of connection and reap a soul that is incapable of feeling true, pure joy. They exist in a state of perpetual need and resentment, because the only thing they can successfully attract is more of the darkness they project. They attempt to fill this void with material possessions or superficial adoration, but the void expands to meet the offering. The seer can view this soul with the wisdom of silence, knowing that their own actions have already sentenced them to a life where the highest goods, peace, love, and contentment, are spiritually inaccessible. Their reaping is a continuous, internal famine. Pattern 4. The law of resonance and attraction, the victim's cycle. The final pattern of consequence speaks less to deliberate malice and more to the subtle, almost unconscious seeds of victimhood, resentment, or inner chaos. This person consistently sows seeds of blame, viewing all external challenges as evidence of their perpetual bad luck or the malice of others, without ever claiming responsibility for their own internal contribution to the scenario. They sow a constant complaint and a spiritual paralysis. This is a subtle mocking of the law, as they believe they can be exempt from the principle of inner work. The law of reaping is executed through the mechanism of resonance and attraction. The universe simply responds in kind, delivering scenarios and people that perfectly match the low-frequency seed sown by the individual's consciousness. They sow a feeling of powerlessness, and they reap experiences that constantly reinforce their belief in their own powerlessness. They are magnets for people who will exploit them, circumstances that will disappoint them, and situations that confirm their deepest fears. The harvest is a perpetual cycle of confirmation that locks them into their own self-fulfilling prophecy. The path out of this cycle is to recognize that they are sowing the feeling of victimhood, and therefore reaping the circumstances of victimhood. The authentic discipline required is to change the seed, to sow radical personal responsibility and inner authority, which then automatically begins to attract an entirely different set of circumstances, breaking the long-standing cycle. The call to discipline. The ultimate lesson of Galatians 6:7 is not one of fear, but one of radical empowerment. When you, the conscious believer, fully internalize this law of sowing and reaping, the burden of being the seer is lifted. You no longer need to seek external validation for your integrity, and you are freed from the desperate, exhausting desire for the immediate downfall of those who choose the path of deceit. You are released from the need to manage their justice, because you know the universe is managing it with perfect, silent, and irresistible precision. The law is not suspended for them. It is simply waiting for the full maturation of the poisonous seed. Your focus must shift entirely from the external behavior of others to the meticulous, conscious planting of your own seeds.